I saw your video on sociopaths and thought I would try the against me argument. And try I did, albeit without the same eloquence you have in your videos. It's just practice. I approached a friend and started talking about it and was afraid to find that she did support violence against my person. In the end, she claimed that paying taxes was a requirement of the society we live in, and that she and I must have differing views of living peacefully and violence. Well, it's interesting. I'm going to assume that you're echoing some of her language. So she kind of wriggled out because she said it's a requirement of the society we live in. And that's a way of saying, rather than I screwed up, mistakes were made. You know, it's just very third person, very abstract and so on. So the question to come back is, so you believe that paying this particular group of people is really important. I don't. I consider it immoral. I consider it destructive. Will you allow me to act on my conscience? And if she says, no, you have to go to jail if you disagree with me. Not if you disobey the law, not if you don't pay your taxes, right? Because these are all based upon opinions. These are all based upon opinions that these things are moral things to do. They're legitimate. They're required, whatever you want to call it. So don't let people weasel out by assigning some third-party generic entity that you have to obey. Like, don't obey the priest, obey God. Well, it's not me you're obeying, it's the law. But it's like, but the law only has validity because you believe it has validity. So, once again, we come back to your beliefs. Am I allowed to act on my conscience and to find ways to help the poor other than giving money to a bunch of psychopaths with guns? Can I find a way to help the poor other than creating massive national debts and so on? Will you allow me to follow my conscience without wanting me thrown in jail and shot if I resist? Will you withdraw your consent for violence against me for peaceful activities? And paying taxes is a requirement for living in a civilized society. It's like, so then yes, you do want me thrown in jail. Don't give me this bullshit about taxes and the government and society and peace and the poor. It comes down to you saying, yes, I want you thrown in jail for peaceful activities. It's a one-on-one transaction because the justification for the laws comes from the opinions of the people. The law is only held aloft by the empty helium balloons of people's vapid opinions. Puncture those opinions and don't let them hide behind some general social theory. That's bullshit. Or some human nature argument. Or some argument from consequences. Right, so his friend said, questions were also brought up about maintaining roads, minimum wage regulations, and healthcare. I tried to explain that more efficient private sector would take the place of public companies, to which she asked about the poor people who could not afford any sort of healthcare. I tried to say that charities would step in and help, and then she says, and if not, right? So this is called the God of the gaps, right? It's just another sort of argument which people make about the state. And what they do is they would try to corner you into some area where help is not coming to someone, right? Help is not coming to someone. And then into this void is this magic entity called the state that solves the problem. And the reason I call it the God of the gaps is that it's the same argument that is used in a superstitious or religious context, which is, well, can you tell me exactly how the Big Bang operated and where everything came from? And if you say no, then people say, oh, well, then that's where God did things, right? And the reason it's called the God of the gaps is that there's always some gap in human knowledge. There's always questions that aren't answered. Maybe there are even questions that can't be answered. Do you know what lies outside the universe? No. Well, that's where God could be, right? So there's always some gap in human knowledge, and it used to be, do you know where lightning comes from? Ah, you see, that's the hammer of Thor. Do you know where the tides come from? Ah, you see, that's Neptune slow humping some sperm whale down in the depths, right? So there's always some, wherever you don't know something, there's always considered to be some room for God in there. And of course, you can set up some scenario where some poor person is sick and has no access to healthcare. And then people say, well, you see, that's why we need government. As if the government solves that problem. Right? So people say, what's outside the universe? Well, I don't know. Well, that's where God could be. But that doesn't mean anything. And certainly the trend has been that when we close the gaps and get knowledge, the God or the state argument simply keeps wriggling its way into whatever gap there is about things now. So you say, what about poor people who could not afford any sort of health care? Well, again, make it personal. Don't deal with abstractions. The state is all about and only exists in the justifications within people's heads. The state is a state of mind. The state does not exist in Washington. The state does not exist in London or Amsterdam or Brussels or Cairo or Timbuktu. The state exists a little bit to the right of your left here and a little bit to the left of your right here. That is the only place that the state exists. Everything else is an effect of the beliefs. So somebody says to me, well, what about the poor who've got no health care? I say, well, do you care about them? Yeah, I do. Then you'll help them. It's done. Then you'll help them. Now, if you're not going to help them, then don't give me this bullshit that you care about them. And if you are going to help them, then don't give me this bullshit that we need the state to help people. I say, well, what if not enough people want to help them? Well, I say, first of all, every time I've talked about this for the last 3,000 years, people have brought this up as an issue. So, of course, people care about it. Right? Trust me. And if you start bringing these questions up with people, you will understand, or you will very quickly experience that everybody has the same concern, and therefore the poor will be helped. And they say, well, what if that doesn't happen? I say, well, do you believe that democracy reflects to some degree the will of the majority? Yes. Well, the majority wants Medicare and Medicaid, and they want socialized medicine, they want all of these things, and they want welfare, and they want free schools, and they want blah, 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 blah. And so the politicians provide them. So if democracy reflects the will of the majority, then there will be more than enough people to help the poor. We simply know this because the state has enacted laws which represent the will of the majority. And the will of the majority is, let's take care of the poor, the sick, the old, the weak, the tired, the indigent, the constipated, whatever, right? So no worries. We already have ample empirical evidence. You care, I care, the majority cares. That's why we have these things already. So done and dusted. Say, well, what if somebody falls through the cracks? They cover it. Well, you can set up a scenario wherein someone won't get help. But if they can't get help in a free society, they sure as hell can't get help in a state society either. And of course, there's tons of examples in the past. Doctors used to give pro bono work. They used to take payment in kind, appendectomy for 9 chickens or whatever. And they used to be, it used to cost you about 2 days' wages to get health care for a year back in the day before the government started trying to help out everyone. And that's before technology made things better and cheaper and faster. So all of that is nonsense. But don't get drawn into the God of the gaps. Lord knows. It's happened to me occasionally. But it's really important not to get drawn into that, because it's just a way of diffusing it. Well, what if this? What if this? What if this? You see, you can't solve that problem, therefore we need a government. Well, the government. The other thing you can say is, well, what's going to happen to the poor when the government runs out of money? Right? Governments, what is it now? $15-16 trillion in debt. Unfunded liabilities, $80 trillion plus. So what happens when the government can't pay for the system that it's set up? Because this is this fantasy that the government is some sort of answer. And in the short run, it is, in the same way that heroin is an answer for depression in the short run. And binge eating is an answer for depression in the short run. But in the long run, what happens, right? So what happens in your society, like what happens in the state of society when the government runs out of money? Well, they'll raise taxes. Well, they can't really raise taxes. Taxes are already very high. And people flee raising taxes. Gerard Depardieu did it. Bono, Mr. Let's Pay Off Third World Debt. Bono fled Ireland to escape taxes. People just will move money offshore, or they'll stop working. People leave. A quarter of British millionaires left England when the taxes went up on them. So, the AFRIS curve, right? You just can't just raise taxes. And raising taxes won't solve the problem. The problem is, when you have $80 trillion of unfunded liabilities on a $15 trillion economy, you cannot conceivably raise enough taxes to pay for what you need. It's completely impossible. So what's going to happen to everyone when the government runs out of money? And that's an important question, because they can't answer that, right? I don't know. Well, so stop talking about the one guy who gets hit by lightning and an asteroid and has frozen French frogs rain on him at the same time. In a free society, let's start talking about not the theoretical problems of a free society, but the inevitable catastrophes of a status society. Have them trying to answer the questions. So